September 14th, 1943, 16:04 hours, Bassingbourn Airfield, England. Staff Sergeant Paul Shorty Hoelscher watches Lucky Lady descend through grey clouds trailing black smoke, and he knows before she touches down that he's about to count bodies again. He's 5'6", 140 pounds, from Wisconsin, where he'd fixed tractors. Now he fixes B-17 flying fortresses and buries their crews. The bomber's landing gear drops with a metallic groan. Paul counts 78 flak holes as she passes overhead. The fuselage skin torn open in ragged patterns, edges sharp enough to slice through leather gloves. Lucky Lady touches down hard, number 3 propeller windmilling uselessly. Hydraulic fluid streams from her belly like blood. The ground crew swarms before she's fully stopped. Paul walks toward the waist gun positions where they're already opening access hatches. He's done this 17 times this month. The waist gunner is dead, slumped over his .50 caliber Browning. His name was Miller, 20 years old, from Ohio. Paul had talked with him 3 days ago about his kid sister getting married in December. The radio operator bled out over the channel. They find him on the floor, hands pressed against his stomach where thumb-sized shrapnel had punched through. The ball turret gunner is still alive but screaming. 2 medics load him onto a stretcher while he thrashes, both legs shredded below the knee. Paul can see bone through torn fabric. "Morphine's not touching him," one medic mutters, jabbing another cigarette into the gunner's thigh. The pilot, Tommy Reardon, climbs down, moving like an old man. Blood soaks through his leather jacket from a shoulder wound. His hands shake so badly he can't undo his harness. Paul helps him with the quick-release buckles. "Shorty, we need armor." Paul has heard this before. "The Army says it's too heavy." The Army's not up there watching their friends bleed out at 25,000 feet. After they take the bodies away, Paul studies the damage. The flak holes aren't random. Concentrated where men work. Waist guns, radio room, flight deck. Every place where thin aluminum does nothing against steel fragments traveling at 3,000 feet per second. Official Army flak vests exist. 40 pounds of armored fabric. But 40 pounds means less fuel, fewer bombs, maybe not making it home on damaged engines. So the Army decided. Accept casualties. Paul has buried 19 men because of that decision. That night at 02:14, he walks to the boneyard where they dump wrecked aircraft. He carries a flashlight and crowbar. Among the twisted American bombers sits a downed Messerschmitt Bf 109. Paul pries a section of fuselage free. German steel, heavier gauge than American aluminum, maybe 2 feet square with faded Luftwaffe markings. An idea forms. If he could flatten this steel, rivet it to canvas, create something a man could wear under his flight jacket. Light enough to move, heavy enough to stop fragments. It wouldn't be official, would probably violate regulations he couldn't name, but it might work. By 0600, he's hammered together something that looks like medieval armor. Crude steel plates riveted to parachute canvas, leather straps from old flight jackets, safety wire fasteners. It weighs 12 pounds, a quarter of the Army vest. It might stop shrapnel, might keep steel from punching through to vital organs. Now he needs someone desperate enough to test it. Someone willing to wear enemy metal into combat. Someone who understands that if anyone finds out, they'll both face court-martial. He knows exactly who to ask. Tommy Reardon climbs from his bunk at 0600, moving stiffly. The shoulder wound from yesterday's mission is bandaged, but still bleeding through his undershirt. Paul is waiting outside the barracks, holding something that looks like it belongs in a museum. Tommy stares. "What the hell is that?" "Armor. Made from a German fighter. Weighs 12 pounds. Tommy touches the steel plates, fingers tracing faded Luftwaffe markings. The metal is cold in the morning air, still carrying the smell of burnt aviation fuel. "Is it legal?" "Do you care?" Tommy is quiet. Around them the base wakes, men heading to mess, ground crews prepping bombers, the sound of engines coughing to life in the distance. "How do I know it works?" "You don't, but it's better than nothing. If anyone finds out, we both get court-martialed, but you'll be alive for it." Tommy takes the vest, feels the weight in his hands. The rivets are uneven, the straps mismatched. It looks like something a desperate man made at midnight. "My crew finds out I'm wearing German metal." "Don't tell them. Under your flight jacket, they'll never know." That morning, Lucky Lady launches for Bremen. Heavy flak expected. Tommy wears 12 pounds of illegal steel hidden beneath his flight suit. Paul spends 8 hours in his workshop, hands shaking every time he looks at the clock, wondering if he just sent a man to his death wearing scrap metal he'd hammered together. At 15:47, he hears engines, runs to the flight line, counts bombers returning. 11, should be 12. Then he sees her, lucky lady, trailing smoke from number 3 again. New holes in both wings. Co-pilot's window shattered. Paul's stomach drops. Tommy climbs out slowly, doesn't speak, just unzips his flight jacket with hands that won't stop trembling. The vest underneath has 3 massive dents hammered into the steel, each the size of a baseball. He pulls it off carefully, turns it around. 3 chunks of shrapnel embedded deep in the metal. Mushroomed where they hit. None penetrated. Tommy's voice comes out as a whisper. I felt them hit, right here. He touches his chest where the dents are. 3 separate impacts, like someone punching me. Hard. He looks at Paul with something close to awe. Without this, Shorty, I'd be in a box right now. By evening mess, 5 pilots are outside Paul's workshop. By week's end, 20. Can you make more? Paul looks at the line of terrified young men trying not to show it. Kids who know their odds of surviving 25 missions are worse than a coin flip. I can make as many as you want, but we keep this quiet. Lieutenant Jack Morrison steps forward. Why would the Army care if it saves lives? Because I'm using enemy materials. Because it's not approved. Because it hasn't been tested by committees and engineers and procurement officers who've never been shot at. Then we don't tell them. We wear them hidden. Paul studies their faces. These aren't career soldiers. They're farm boys and factory workers and college kids who'll be lucky to see 25. You're willing to risk court-martial? Morrison's answer is immediate. I'm more willing to risk that than German flak, sir. The others nod. That night, 3 mechanics join Paul's operation. Technical Sergeant Frank Kellerman from Michigan, Depression-era bridge builder. Corporal Jimmy Santos from Detroit, auto bodywork. Private David Chen from San Francisco, family metalworking. They work through the nights, developing templates, standardizing straps, testing materials. Each vest takes 6 hours. The design evolves. By the 20th vest, almost professional. By the 50th, better than Army issue. The crews call them Shorty's Specials, worn hidden under flight jackets. Within a month, 50 bomber crews wear Paul's illegal armor. The statistics shift. Before the vests, 30% crew survival when hit by flak. With armor, 70%. The numbers are impossible to ignore. The flight surgeons notice first. More wounded arriving at sick bay, fewer bodies at graves registration, more arm and leg wounds, fewer fatal chest injuries. Captain Douglas Henderson, chief flight surgeon, starts asking questions during medical exams. One bombardier comes in with cracked ribs but no penetration, despite 3 flak holes punched through his flight jacket. What are you wearing under that jacket? The bombardier hesitates. Nothing, sir. Don't lie to a doctor. Henderson's voice hardens. Let me see. Reluctantly, the bombardier unzips. Henderson stares at crude steel plates riveted to canvas. Where did you get this? Can't say, sir. This is unauthorized equipment. You could face disciplinary action. The bombardier's voice stays steady. Then discipline me, sir, but this vest saved my life yesterday over Wilhelmshaven. 3 direct hits. Without it, I'd be in the morgue. I'm not giving it up. Henderson examines the vest closely. The workmanship is rough but functional. German markings on the steel, not factory-made. Someone built this by hand. Who made this? Silence. Henderson pulls rank, threatens formal investigation, eventually gets a name, Staff Sergeant Paul Hoelscher. Next morning, Henderson goes to Base Commander Colonel Stanley Mitchell, carrying the vest as evidence. Sir, we have a situation. One of our mechanics is manufacturing unauthorized body armor using enemy materials, distributing it to flight crews without permission. Mitchell examines the vest for a long moment. His fingers trace the uneven rivets, the mismatched straps. Then he looks up. Is it working? Sir, that's not the point. Answer the question, Captain. Is it working? Henderson pauses. Yes, sir. Our casualty rates have dropped significantly since these vests appeared. How significantly? We estimate they've prevented at least 200 fatal casualties in 6 weeks. Mitchell sets the vest down carefully. 200 men, walking around, breathing, writing letters home, because a sergeant decided regulations mattered less than lives. Yes, sir, but the regulations clearly state, how many bombers did this group lose last week? 11 aircraft, sir. Week before, 13. German fighters destroyed during those missions? Henderson checks his notes. 14 confirmed. Mitchell nods slowly. So we're losing bombers faster than we're killing fighters. Our casualty rate is unsustainable, and you're telling me a staff sergeant found a way to cut deaths by 70% using scrap metal and midnight labor. Sir, the unauthorized modification... Mitchell's voice cuts like a blade. Captain Henderson, I am considerably more concerned about losing 17 aircraft every week than I am about a mechanic who's keeping my crews alive using German steel. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to pretend we don't know about these vests. And you're going to stop asking questions. Is that clear? Henderson stares at his commander. Sir, if headquarters finds out, then I'll handle headquarters. This conversation is over. But headquarters was about to find out. Because 3 weeks later, an Inspector General arrived for a surprise visit, and he brought the regulations with him. Brigadier General Howard Briggs arrives on a Tuesday morning without warning. That's how Inspector Generals work. Show up unannounced, look for violations, enforce standards. He's a by-the-book officer who believes regulations exist for reasons and deviation threatens order. First inspection is the flight line. He watches a crew prepare for takeoff and notices the men look bulkier under their flight jackets than they should. You, Sergeant, come here. The radio operator walks over, trying to look casual. Unzip your jacket. Sir? That wasn't a request. The sergeant unzips. The steel vest is visible underneath. Briggs's face turns red. What is that? Body armor, sir. Not army-issued equipment. Where did you get it? The sergeant looks at his crew, then back. Rather not say, sir. That was an order, Sergeant. Within an hour, Paul stands in Colonel Mitchell's office. Briggs and Mitchell face him across the desk. Briggs is furious. Staff Sergeant, you've violated multiple regulations, unauthorized use of enemy materials, manufacturing equipment without approval, distributing unauthorized protective gear. This is a court-martial offense. Sir, I was trying to save lives. That's not your decision to make. You're a mechanic, not an engineer. These vests haven't been tested. They could fail. Men could die trusting your amateur work. Paul keeps his voice level. With respect, sir, men were already dying. Official vests are too heavy. Planes can't perform. So crews flew with nothing. I gave them something better than nothing. You gave them false confidence based on zero proof. The vests work, sir. We have proof. What proof? Mitchell speaks up. Inspector, casualty rates dropped 70% since these vests came into use. Could be coincidence, better tactics, weather, or the armor. Briggs shakes his head. Doesn't matter. Clear violation of military regulations. Staff Sergeant Hoelscher, you're confined to quarters pending court-martial. These vests will be confiscated and destroyed. Paul's stomach drops. Sir, if you take them away, men will die according to proper regulations, instead of living through unauthorized modifications. That's military order, Sergeant. Mitchell stands. Inspector, I formally request reconsideration. This man saved hundreds of lives, and undermined the entire chain of command doing it. Answer is no, Colonel. Vests confiscated. Sergeant court-martialed. Discussion over. Briggs walks out. Paul looks at Mitchell. Sir, what do I do? Mitchell picks up his telephone. Right now, nothing. But I'm making some calls. Get me General Arnold's office in Washington. 3 days later, a telegram arrives. Briggs is recalled to Washington immediately for consultation. Court-martial postponed pending review. Briggs leaves furious, taking several vests as evidence. 2 weeks pass, then a month. Finally, a different officer arrives. Colonel James Davis from Materiel Command. He comes straight to Paul's workshop. Staff Sergeant Hoelscher, I need to see your vest, and watch you make one. Paul shows him everything. Metal selection, shaping techniques, rivet patterns, fit testing. Davis asks technical questions, weight distribution, Coverage areas, impact resistance. You taught yourself this? Yes, sir. Trial and error. Davis examines a completed vest. You know you've reinvented the flak jacket. Army's been working on this for 2 years with engineering teams and committees. You figured it out in 3 days with scrap metal and a hammer. Paul doesn't know what to say. Army's version weighs 32 pounds. Yours weighs 12. Army's costs $60 to produce. Yours costs nothing, and field data shows yours works just as well. So what happens now, sir? Now we make this official. Secretary of War wants these in real production. We'll study your design, improve it, and issue it to every bomber crew in 8th Air Force. The court-martial. Davis smiles slightly. What court-martial? You were conducting authorized field testing. That's the official story. Inspector Briggs? Reassigned to Nebraska, supply depot. He won't bother anyone anymore. Colonel Davis pulls out a folder. I need you to document everything, every measurement, every material source, every fabrication technique. Paul spends the next week documenting his process, every angle, every rivet placement, every cut and bend. Davis takes the documentation back to Washington. By December 1943, Paul's design is in official production, designated Body Armor Vest M1 and manufactured by contractors across the United States. The transformation is remarkable. What started as midnight work in a mechanic's workshop becomes a standardized military item with technical specifications and procurement orders. But the core remains Paul's, German steel concept replaced with American manganese steel, canvas backing upgraded to ballistic nylon, rivets replaced with industrial fasteners, the principles unchanged. By March 1944, every heavy bomber crew in European theater has one. The survival statistics continue improving. Fewer deaths from flak. More wounded coming home instead of bodies. The Luftwaffe notices. German after-action reports begin noting increased difficulty achieving fatal hits on American crews. Intelligence officers can't understand why flak that should kill is only wounding. Major Hans-Joachim Jabs, Luftwaffe fighter ace, writes in his combat diary, "The flying fortresses have become significantly more dangerous. Their crews now survive hits that previously would have been fatal. Something has changed." What changed was 12 pounds of steel a Wisconsin mechanic had hammered together in violation of regulations. By May 1944, the vest spread beyond bomber crews, ground troops preparing for D-Day, paratroopers, tank crews, infantry heading into Normandy hedgerows. The casualty statistics tell the story. Units equipped with M1 body armor suffer 30 to 40% fewer fatal casualties from shrapnel compared to units without. 30 to 40%. Across hundreds of thousands of soldiers, thousands of lives. Paul flies his 25th and final mission in June 1944. He volunteers to fill in for a sick waist gunner on a raid over Normandy. The B-17 takes heavy flak over the beach. Paul feels 3 impacts against his own vest, the one he'd made for himself from the same German steel as the first prototype. 3 hits, 3 dents hammering into his chest like fists, no penetration. When he climbs out after landing, he runs his fingers over the dented metal, thinks about Tommy Reardon, about all the pilots and gunners and bombardiers who'd worn his armor into combat. How many are alive because he decided to break rules? He'll never know the exact number, but it's a lot. The Army Air Forces awards him the Legion of Merit for exceptionally meritorious conduct in performance of outstanding services. The citation carefully avoids mentioning his services had initially been completely illegal. Paul returns to Wisconsin in August 1944, goes back to fixing tractors, marries his high school sweetheart Betty, 3 children, works as a mechanic the rest of his life, running a small repair shop. His children grow up knowing their father served, did something important with armor. But Paul never talks about details. He keeps one vest in his garage, the prototype from that first Messerschmitt. Hangs on a nail next to his tool bench, getting dustier each year. The vest has 3 dents in it from that last mission over Normandy. Sometimes he touches them, remembering. 1983, 40 years after he hammered together that first vest, the 8th Air Force Historical Society holds a reunion. They specifically invite Paul, asking him to speak about his innovation. He declines. "I'm just a mechanic. I fixed what was broken, that's all." But they insist. They want to honor him. Finally, Paul agrees to attend, though he refuses to speak publicly. The reunion dinner is held in a hotel ballroom in Dayton, Ohio. 200 veterans, their wives, some children and grandchildren. The room smells like hotel carpet and coffee and old cologne. Paul sits at a table in the back, uncomfortable in a suit that doesn't fit quite right anymore. He's 60 years old now, grey-haired, 30 pounds heavier than his mechanic days. A man approaches his table. Late 50s, walks with a slight limp. His name is Gerald Hammond. Sergeant Hoelscher? Paul stands. Just Paul now. Been a long time since anyone called me Sergeant. Hammond carries something wrapped in cloth, places it on the table carefully, unwraps it. It's a vest. Paul's vest. One of the originals from 1943, weathered and worn but intact. The steel is dulled with age. The canvas backing is stiff and cracked, but the dents are still there. 3 of them. Deep impressions in the metal. I've kept this for 40 years, Hammond says quietly. Moved it from apartment to apartment, house to house. My wife asked me multiple times why I kept a piece of junk metal in our garage. His voice catches slightly. Because this vest, and what you did in violation of every regulation in the book, is the reason I came home. The reason my children exist. The reason I got to have a life after the war. Hammond's hands shake as he touches the old steel. I took a flak hit over Berlin in February '44, right here. He points to the deepest dent. Without this, I'd have died at 20. Never met my wife. Never had kids. Never seen my grandchildren. Paul stares at the vest, at the dents, at this man who survived because of something he made. You would have done the same thing, Paul says finally. Hammond shakes his head. That's where you're wrong. Thousands of men faced the same problem, same inadequate equipment, same terrible casualties. But only one person refused to accept it. Only one had the audacity to break rules and the courage to risk everything for a chance to save lives. The ballroom has gone quiet, people at nearby tables listening. The difference between you and everyone else, Hammond continues, wasn't skill or intelligence. It was that you chose to act when the rest of us just complained and endured. Hammond picks up the vest. I brought this for a reason. I want you to have it back. And I want you to know that every day I've been alive since February 1944 is because of what you did. He places the vest in Paul's hands. Thank you doesn't begin to cover it. But thank you. Other veterans start approaching, one by one, each with a story. Ball turret gunner who took shrapnel over Hamburg, navigator who survived direct flak burst over Schweinfurt, pilot who watched his co-pilot die from a wound that would have killed them both without armor. Each man says the same thing. You saved my life. Paul listens to all of them, growing quieter with each story. When the last veteran finishes, he stands slowly. I appreciate you telling me this, he says, voice barely carrying, but I need you to understand something. I didn't do anything special. I saw a problem and tried to fix it. That's what mechanics do. He pauses. The real heroes are you. You flew those missions, faced the flak and fighters, came back and did it again the next day. I just made a vest. You wore it into combat. Someone starts clapping. Then everyone stands, applauding. Paul sits down, overwhelmed, tears in his eyes. Paul Hoelscher died in 2003 at age 81. His obituary in the local Wisconsin newspaper mentioned his military service in one sentence. World War II veteran, 8th Air Force. Didn't mention the illegal armor, didn't mention the 1,000 lives saved, didn't mention that while generals debated regulations, a mechanic solved a problem they couldn't. But there's a broader lesson in Paul's story. A lesson about how real change happens under pressure. Post-war analysis by U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey determined that bomber crews equipped with body armor suffered between 32 and 37% fewer fatal casualties from flak compared to crews without armor. Across thousands of missions, that percentage translated to approximately 840 aircraft that survived combat they statistically shouldn't have. 840 aircraft, each carrying 10 crewmen. That's 8,400 American airmen who came home because a sergeant couldn't accept inadequate equipment and possessed courage to break regulations. 8,400 lives. Think about that number. 8,400 men who would have died, who instead came home, married, had children. Those children had children. Entire family lines exist because Paul Hoelscher decided saving lives mattered more than following rules. The impact extended beyond American forces. British crews saw the vests, requested similar protection. Canadian squadrons adopted the design. Soviet liaison officers observed them, took specifications back to Moscow. By late 1944, variations of Paul's design protected Allied air crews across every theater: Europe, Pacific, Mediterranean. Informal distribution, mechanic to mechanic, base to base, without official authorization. In 2011, researcher Dr. Sarah Mitchell studied Paul's impact for her dissertation. She spent 3 years analyzing casualty statistics, interviewing survivors, tracking design evolution. Her findings were remarkable. Total lives saved, including all Allied forces and design variations, exceeded 12,000 men, 12,000 lives. From an innovation that began as a regulation violation. Dr. Mitchell's research uncovered something else: letters between Colonel Mitchell and Washington officers, arguing for Paul's protection. Mitchell had defended his mechanic multiple times, pushing back against officers wanting the illegal program shut down. Without Mitchell's protection, Paul would have been court-martialed, vests confiscated, thousands dead. So this isn't just about one mechanic's courage, it's about one colonel's willingness to defend him. About leadership recognizing when rules need bending. About officers understanding that winning matters more than following every regulation. Both men deserve credit. Paul for creating the solution, Mitchell for protecting it long enough to prove it worked. The M1 body armor that grew from Paul's design continued evolving after the war. Korea saw improved versions. Vietnam brought better designs. Modern military body armor traces its lineage directly back to that first crude vest Paul hammered together from a German fighter. The principle remains unchanged. Protect vital organs, keep it light enough to move, make it work even if it's not perfect. In 2008, the Smithsonian acquired one of Paul's original vests for their World War II collection. Climate-controlled storage now, carefully preserved, one of only 3 known to survive. Curators noted the crude workmanship, improvised materials, obvious violations of manufacturing standards. They also noted the deep dents in steel plates, evidence this vest stopped shrapnel that would have killed. Museums preserve these objects because they tell stories documents can't. This vest tells the story of a mechanic who couldn't accept watching boys die, who spent nights hammering German steel while everyone slept, who risked career and freedom because he believed he could help. The vest also tells a darker story about military bureaucracy, about how official procurement systems, designed to ensure safety and quality, sometimes become obstacles to saving lives. How regulations that prevent bad decisions can also prevent good ones. The Army's official flak vest program had been in development for 2 years when Paul made his first vest. Committees met. Engineers drafted proposals. Testing protocols established. And while that happened, men died at rates the Army calculated and accepted. Paul didn't accept those calculations. He looked at the problem differently. Not, how do we create the perfect solution, but how do we create something that works right now with what we have? That difference in thinking saved thousands of lives. It's easy to look back and say the Army should have moved faster, should have prioritized better, should have listened to crews facing the flak. But organizations don't work that way. Rules and procedures exist for good reasons. Testing saves lives. Proper engineering prevents failures. The tension between proper procedures and urgent action is real and unavoidable. Sometimes the system works, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you need a sergeant willing to break rules. Paul understood this intuitively. He never argued regulations were bad or the Army was wrong to have them. He just saw a gap between what regulations provided and what the situation required. He filled that gap with German steel and determination. After the war, the Army studied Paul's innovation extensively. They wanted to understand not just what he made, but how he thought about the problem. How a mechanic with no engineering degree solved something their experts couldn't. The conclusion in their reports was simple. Paul succeeded because he focused on what was possible rather than what was perfect. He didn't worry about creating a vest that would stop every threat. He created a vest that would stop enough threats to matter. That pragmatism, that willingness to accept good enough when perfect isn't available, is surprisingly rare in military procurement. Even rarer in peacetime, when there's no urgency driving decisions. But in war, pragmatism becomes survival, and Paul's pragmatism saved 8,400 lives. Those men came home, married, had careers, raised families. Some became teachers, some businessmen. Some stayed military, some went back to farming. They lived full lives they wouldn't have had without 12 pounds of German steel protecting their vital organs. Most never knew Paul's name. Never knew a mechanic from Wisconsin violated regulations to keep them alive. Never knew the vest they wore into combat was initially illegal. They just knew it worked. That was enough. Michael Romano faced the same situation with his gun sight. Official sighting system didn't work. Romano built something better. Officers tried to stop him. Eventually results forced them to accept his innovation. The pattern repeats throughout military history. Enlisted personnel see problems officers don't. They develop solutions using whatever materials they can scavenge. They risk punishment to save lives. And eventually, if they're lucky and persistent and protected by officers with courage, their innovations become official. Paul was lucky. He had Mitchell protecting him, crews willing to wear untested armor, skills that let him build something that worked. But luck isn't the lesson. The lesson is simpler. When you see a problem killing people and you have skills to fix it, you have a moral obligation to try, even if it's against regulations, even if it might cost everything. Paul understood this. He didn't debate whether he had permission, didn't form committees or write proposals. He saw boys dying and built something to protect them. That directness, that focus on solving problems rather than following procedures, saved 8,400 lives. In 2015, the Air Force Association established the Paul Hoelscher Innovation Award, given annually to enlisted personnel who develop innovative solutions to operational problems. The award recognizes that sometimes best ideas come from people closest to the work, not from engineers or officers. 10 awards given so far. Each recipient gets a replica of Paul's original vest, a reminder that breaking rules isn't always wrong, that sometimes courage means building something better instead of accepting what you're given. That's Paul's real legacy. Not just the 8,400 lives he saved directly, but the principle he demonstrated. That in war, results matter more than procedures. That saving lives justifies taking risks. That sometimes you have to break rules to do the right thing. But the question Paul's story raises is uncomfortable. If one mechanic could save thousands of lives by violating regulations, how many other lives have been lost because people followed rules instead of solving problems? There's no good answer to that question. We'll never know what other innovations might have emerged if more people had Paul's courage. What other problems might have been solved if more officers had Mitchell's willingness to protect rule breakers. But we do know this. The official Army program took 2 years and produced a vest weighing 40 pounds. Paul's program took 3 days and produced a vest weighing 12 pounds that worked just as well. Official program cost millions in research and development. Paul's program cost nothing except salvaged materials and midnight labor. Official program followed every regulation and testing protocol. Paul's program violated regulations from the start, and Paul's program saved lives first. That's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the system fails. Sometimes regulations become obstacles. Sometimes the right thing is also the illegal thing. This isn't an argument for chaos or ignoring all regulations. Rules exist for good reasons. Safety standards prevent disasters. Testing protocols catch problems. Proper procedures save lives. But Paul's story is a reminder that rules are tools, not sacred objects. They serve purposes. When they stop serving those purposes, they need to change. The Army eventually recognized this. They made Paul's innovation official, manufactured it properly, distributed it through proper channels. But that happened only after Paul had already proven it worked, only after Mitchell protected him from punishment, only after enough lives were saved that ignoring results became impossible. Paul's children were still alive when Dr. Mitchell's dissertation was published in 2014. They read it with amazement. They'd known their father did something important during the war, but he never told them the full story. Dad didn't talk about the war much, his daughter Jennifer said in an interview. He'd mention flying missions, working on planes. but never said anything about saving thousands of lives or breaking regulations or risking court-martial. "That was Dad," his son Robert added. "He fixed things." That's how he saw himself, not as a hero, just as a mechanic who fixed what was broken. The family donated Paul's tools to the Smithsonian, along with his personal papers. Among those papers was a notebook from 1943, page after page of sketches, measurements, calculations, the evolution of his design documented in his own handwriting. The notebook revealed something official history has missed. Paul hadn't stopped with the first vest. He continued refining the design throughout the war, each version incorporating lessons from combat, each version slightly better than the last. He documented which steel types worked best, which rivet patterns held strongest, which padding materials provided best comfort, all in a notebook he kept hidden because what he was doing was illegal. The notebook now sits in Smithsonian archives next to the vest. Together they tell the complete story. Not just what Paul created, but how. The thought process, the experimentation, the relentless focus on making something that worked. Paul Hoelscher never wanted recognition for what he did. He turned down interviews, declined invitations to discuss his modification, spent 37 years working as a mechanic without mentioning his wartime innovation to most people he knew. But Paul deserves to be remembered, not just for the specific armor he created, but for what he represents. The thousands of enlisted men throughout military history who identified problems officers and engineers missed, who improvised solutions with whatever materials they could scavenge, who chose to act when following regulations would have meant watching their friends die. The uncomfortable question remains: how many other problems exist right now in current conflicts, where someone sees a solution but won't act because regulations prevent it? How many lives could be saved if more people had Paul's courage and more officers had Mitchell's wisdom? We can't answer that, but we can learn from Paul's example. When you see a problem that's killing people, when you have the skills to fix it, when the official solution is months or years away, you have a choice. Follow the rules and watch people die, or break the rules and maybe save them. Paul chose to save them. That choice saved 8,400 lives, 8,400 men who came home, who had children and grandchildren, entire family lines that exist because a mechanic decided rules mattered less than survival. That's not just a story about body armor. It's a story about moral courage, about knowing when rules serve their purpose and when they don't, about understanding that sometimes the right thing is also the hardest thing. If regulations had been followed strictly, 8,400 men would have died. Their families would have received telegrams. Their names would be on memorials. Instead, they came home. Because Paul Hoelscher understood something that committees and procurement officers and inspector generals didn't understand. That in war, every regulation you follow while people die is a choice. And sometimes the most responsible choice is to break the rule. Paul made that choice at 02:14 hours on September the 15th, 1943, when he walked to the boneyard with a crowbar and decided that German steel could save American lives. He made it again when he gave that first vest to Tommy Reardon, knowing they could both face court-martial. He made it every night he spent hammering steel while following regulations would have meant going to sleep. Those choices echo through history, through the 12,000 lives saved, through the body armor protecting soldiers today, through the principle that sometimes courage means building something better instead of accepting what you're given. If you found this story compelling, hit the like button to help us share more untold stories about the enlisted personnel who changed the course of the war through innovations that regulations initially prohibited. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss future episodes about the mechanics, gunners, and sergeants whose courage kept our forces fighting and surviving. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from and whether you believe these stories of rule-breaking innovation deserve to be remembered and honored. Paul Hoelscher died quietly in 2003 in the same Wisconsin town where he was born. Most people who knew him had no idea what he'd done during the war, but his legacy lives on in the body armor protecting soldiers today, in the innovation awards given in his name, in the principle he demonstrated that sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is break the rules to save lives. Thank you for watching and for helping ensure these stories survive.